We are going back in time today to an age of better Star Wars games. You know, Star Wars games before Disney, before EA, and before all of that canon business, when there was no shortage of Star Wars games and the majority of them were absolutely amazing. Now, on a serious note, I want to talk about some things that were just better in the older Star Wars games and why I'm actually excited to see what is to come with the games that we're going to get in the future. So if you want to hear about games unlike any of the Star Wars games we have today, or just the good old nostalgic blast from the past, sit back and let me just get right into this video. So right off the bat, I just want to say that I don't think the Star Wars games under EA and Disney have been terrible by any means. I can remember some really fond memories of both Battlefront Reboot and having some fun with the first Fallen Order game. I just haven't tried the second. But you would be lying to say if there's anything like back in the day, like games like Dark Forces or Jedi Knight, even the original Battlefront from back in 2004, they all had a charm and it felt like something right out of a Star Wars movie itself. And all the games were just so unique to the Star Wars franchise, and honestly, it had some of the best series of all time. Now, as I said, I don't think that the newer games are terrible, but ever since Force Unleashed, it's like, where's the love that used to be put into the Star Wars games? But luckily though, after the drought of good games that EA has put us through, I am not even going to say Star Wars games there. We got Fallen Order, which might just feel like a Star Wars Souls-like, but it is a really good start to getting back to where the games were before. And luckily now, EA no longer has its hands grasped on the Star Wars gaming domain, and other companies are finally going to be able to put their spin on things. We already have seen new things popping up like Star Wars Outlaws coming from Ubisoft, Eclipse from Quantum Dream, Hunters from Nintendo, and of course the KOTOR remake that everyone has got their eyes on, and that's not even completely new. Now, with all these awesome looking Star Wars games coming out, I just wanted to look back at some of the amazing games we had in the past and talk about some of the great classics in general in the Star Wars gaming history. So I just want to say, I think that the goal of creating Star Wars games was purely from a monetizational standpoint for EA, and not that they weren't good, they just never gave us anything new. Battlefront was pretty fun, yet it was just like someone made a Star Wars mod for Battlefield 4, and with Battlefront 2, it started off as a complete cash grab. I know that they fixed it. Then I think EA learned their lesson, letting someone who actually cared about Star Wars and its story create the Fallen Order games. And though Jedi Survivor may have had a little bit of a rocky launch, I have not given it a try yet, so I'm not going to say if it's great or if it's bad, but it looks really good and it's had really great reception, and I think it was just performance issues. I don't think it's anything wrong with the actual game. And I also want to say that I don't think the issues with story are only due to EA. I think that the canon purge honestly had something to do with it. If you don't know what the canon purge is, let me explain. During Disney's reign over Star Wars, Lucas decided that anything outside of the already established movie line at the time, which was 1 through 9, would no longer be canon, meaning that all the older games, including KOTOR, including The Force Unleashed, along with all of the amazing comics that followed and continued this Star Wars story, would no longer be relevant and concurrent to the actual main Star Wars universe. This became Star Wars Legends, which was any of the story that the fans knew that happened to not be canon and did not happen within those 9 movies. And trust me, there was way more than what even compiled into episodes 1 through 9. With that, I bet EA had some trouble clearing a story that wouldn't be an issue with canon, which is why they could have gone the Battlefront path, not only being a reboot of an amazing and already really popular series, along with it not having a general story and the locations followed the movies and didn't really hold anything new in themselves. I feel like that's how they got off with that. The Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor series though, it had its own story, and honestly, it was a really good story. Along with the good story, the worlds that they gave us were great representations of the Star Wars worlds we already knew. Though gameplay wise, honestly it feels like something we had before. It felt similar to games like Sekiro or Dark Souls, with a Star Wars twist, which makes sense when you think about it because of how popular Souls-like games were and still are at the time. Now, I will say, I think that the Souls-like game style did work really well with the games, and I will say fans wanted something a little more unique, though Respawn, I feel like they gave us the best thing they could have. But the older games we had like KOTOR, where the story brought you hundreds of years before the movies took place, letting you control a Jedi turned Sith, or Bounty Hunter, where you took the reins of Jango Fett a couple years before the events of Attack of the Clones, and one of my favorites, becoming Darth Vader's apprentice, soon beating him down and joining the Jedi in The Force Unleashed and The Force Unleashed 2. So when you compare those two stories to the story of the Battlefront 2 reboot, or the lack thereof in Battlefront 1, it was kind of disappointing to see the absolute lack of good interactive Star Wars stories. Though, as I said, I do think Respawn definitely got the ball rolling on all of the new games coming out. Now, I want to talk about some of the older games that were my favorites. And honestly, there have been so many Star Wars games and so many good ones, going all the way back to games like Super Star Wars and even further, even having some pretty awesome arcade cabinet games out there if you were ever lucky enough to give it a play before arcades just started to like disappear into thin air. And what I think made them so good was the different developers making them. There were so many different types of games, so many different types of stories, and honestly, ironically, the game that I think I will remember most is the Force Unleashed games. I know that most people will either say the same thing, or they would just call me a poser for that being one of my favorites because everyone knows that game, though it may be one of my favorites and the Star Wars game that I remember so vividly from my childhood. It is not my all-time favorite. I can spit out multiple different reasons why a bunch of different games could be my favorite Star Wars game, but honestly, if I had to say that there was one game I could choose for the only Star Wars game, I would choose a series. Obviously, I'm sorry, but it would be the Jedi Knight series. Age and graphics aside, the mechanic and story throughout both of those games, and even its origin game, Dark Forces, was just amazing, especially for it being the first ever Star Wars first-person shooter. Interestingly enough, there technically never was a Jedi Knight 1. The first game in the series was an expansion for Dark Forces 2 back in 1998, and they just ended up releasing Jedi Knight 2, and then they just ended up releasing Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast later in 2002. But the certain first-person gunplay and third-person lightsaber combat with the option of third-person gunplay, it all worked together so smoothly, and the story arc of Kyle Katarn is just really fun and a really good story, and you know, getting to see an Imperial turned Rebel turned Jedi, and not only the story, the mechanics to this day are some of the best. The way the lightsaber worked in that game was so advanced for the time. It had physics, like when you would go up to a wall and it would touch the walls and floors, it would leave a melted line behind it, and it would match up really well to the blade. And along with that, moving the reticle across the screen would determine the certain directions of swings and swinging stances. The mechanics were just great for the times, and even today. I mean, the game that Jedi Knight was derived from, Dark Forces, was also amazing, being like a Star Wars version of Doom, and as I said, the first ever first-person Star Wars game. And a great twist on the Star Wars story before all of the bad twists. Now, let's not forget about the Old Republic, or Galaxies, two amazing MMOs, and honestly, like, my World of Warcraft games. They were the games that actually got me into World of Warcraft and other MMOs. I never was really into that type of game until a friend showed me the Old Republic and I gave it a try and I fell in love. But I could drone on and on and on about all of the amazing old Star Wars games, but that would take absolutely forever. And I actually do want to talk about some of the upcoming games that I am quite excited for too. So I'm honestly quite excited for what is to come in the world of Star Wars video games, but there are a couple that I'm looking forward to the most. Honestly, the one I'm the most anticipating is probably pretty obvious, but I cannot wait for the KOTOR remake. I know that we haven't seen a whole lot on that game yet, but knowing what the original game was, I can already know that this game is a game to be hyped for. Though there has been some development issues and some stuff that seems to be going on behind the scenes, so I guess we will have to wait to see on that one, but it's a game to be excited for. Another game that I think looks really good is Eclipse. I know that's another one that we haven't really seen a lot on, but knowing who is behind that game is what has me so excited. So Eclipse is being made by Quantic Dream. Now those are the developers behind Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human. If you know those games and the way they are played, they are really unique kinds of games, focusing very heavily on storytelling, making it like you are playing an interactive movie, and the graphics are always absolutely superb. So with the game they're developing, I bet it will be like playing through an actual Star Wars movie, and knowing their storytelling ability, I cannot wait to see the absolutely amazing Star Wars story that they're gonna give us. So I know those two aren't the only games, and honestly those are not the only two that I'm hyped for, but those are the two that I'm most hyped for. I know Outlaws looks great, I don't know what to think so far, as one huge issue with the recent Star Wars games has been EA. Outlaws is being made by Ubisoft, another huge company that has the same issues that EA has, so there could be certain bad aspects of that game that we just don't know what to expect. So with that said, I think the game looks great, and I hope it's just an amazing, smuggling, open-world Star Wars game. Now, honestly, I could talk about Star Wars games for hours, whether it's about the older games and all of the amazing ones I remember playing, all the way to talking about the pros and cons of the EA games, but I think I can just sum it all down to say there was a lot of absolutely amazing older Star Wars games in the late 90s and early 2000s, and slowly the amount and quality of those games weaned away, but it seems like the Star Wars games are coming back, and we will hopefully get some more canon story in the bunch, and there are a lot of different developers who are also in the mix, so I'm excited to see what is to come, and it was honestly nice looking back at those games. Now this video is droning on longer than I'd wanted to, like most of the recent videos have been, so I'm just gonna end it off there. You know, if you enjoyed this video, let me know what you thought. If you have any of the new Star Wars games coming that you're excited for, let me know what you are most excited for in the comments below, and if you wanted to add anything or just any suggestions on a video, throw that in the comments too. And as always, go check out my channel if you enjoyed this video. I got a bunch of other videos over there, and don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date on everything coming out. If you heard any music that you like, go check out BillyTheWhip.com or just Billy the Whip on any music platform. And as always, I've gotta say it, have a great day.
Doing flips on the track in my spit. Said they wanted the smoke but then couldn't handle it. Haters just waiting till the whip up a quit, but the kids too, people just wait till he split. Billy the Whip got outlaw wit. Everything out his mouth gotta sound so slick, and it's making people sick cause it's so toxic. All the voices in my head sick of being gaslit. Killing it like I never